Good afternoon and good morning to our participants in Canada and, of course, in the Netherlands. Thank you for joining the webinar on circular plastics in Canada and the Netherlands. My name is Ruben Nubelaar. I represent Holland Circular Hotspot and I'll be moderating this session. Let me start by mentioning that this webinar will be recorded. Any questions you may have for the speakers, please use the Q&A box. And this webinar is organized by Holland Circular Hotspot in close collaboration with the Dutch Consulate in Toronto, Canada Circular Hotspot, and of course our speakers. So today it's about exchanging knowledge and sharing best practices in the use and reuse of plastics. Actually, plastics is one often most sustainable choice for packages and consumer goods. It's strong, light, flexible, tough, waterproof, and easy to use. But we know about its disadvantages, especially if plastics end up in our streets, rivers, and oceans, becoming microplastics that pollute our planet. So we have to get rid of a system where we use, throw away, and landfill or incinerate. We need to see plastics as a valuable raw material, and we should start to treat it in that way. So today it's about exchanging knowledge between Canada and the Netherlands. What kind of innovations are we working on and how can we learn from each other? And how can we help each other? What are the opportunities for collaboration? After all, we're working with international supply chains, so we need each other. And what are the policies in the EU, the Netherlands and Canada, and how can they help to speed up innovations or new technologies? So let me quickly guide you through the program. We'll start with a few words of welcome by Mayan Lahat, who is Senior Advisor Economic Affairs at the Dutch Consulate in Toronto. Then we'll move over to a presentation of Colleen Isaacs, who is Executive Director of Canada Circular Hotspot. We'll pass on to Arna Passenier, who will talk about circular plastics policies and latest development in the Netherlands and the EU. Then we talk about Canada policy developments by Joe Ruska. He will be followed by Esther van den Beuken of TNO, who will talk about new technologies and improved plastic reuse and recycling. And then we'll move to a presentation of Harmen Otten, project manager at Van Werven Recycling, who will be talking about accelerating recycling of bulky rigid plastics. Then we'll go back to Joe Ruska to talk about some best practices circular approach for plastics. And then we'll end up with a nice panel discussion and live Q&A. So please also use the Q&A box for any questions you might have. And then I'll be handing over to Mayan for a few words of welcome. Mayan, over to you.
Thank you, Ruben. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mayan Lahat, and I work as a senior advisor within the Economic Department of the Consulate General of the Netherlands in Toronto. Together with our colleagues in Ottawa and Vancouver, we open doors for Dutch entrepreneurs and share best practices and stimulate collaboration. Canada and the Netherlands have a special and strong relationship. Our shared norms and values make Canada and the Netherlands like-minded states and natural partners, also in doing business. Doing business in a sustainable way is also in the DNA of Dutch companies. As the government, together with the private sector and knowledge institutes, we are continuously seeking collaboration with partners worldwide to develop sustainable and smart solutions. One of the themes that we are proactively promoting is circular economy. And we're very excited to partner with Holland Circular Hotspot on today's event, in which we aim to highlight opportunities to learn, share, explore, and pilot solutions. Our collaboration with Holland Circular Hotspot started in May 2019, when we hosted Freek van Eyck, Holland Circular Hotspot's Executive Director, during a 3-day visit to Toronto, Ottawa, and Vancouver, to kick off our CE promotion efforts and to inspire both the private and public sector with some great examples of circularity in action in the Netherlands. Today's objective is also to inspire each other with examples and good circular practices on both sides of the Atlantic, and to have a frank discussion about innovation facilitated and supported by smart policies necessary for accelerating a circular economy wherein everyone will benefit. We are grateful and thrilled to have so much expertise around the digital table today. We're also very pleased that Canada Circular Hotspot is joining us for this webinar. And you will most certainly be hearing more about Canada Circular Hotspot in the coming year, as they have been selected to organize the first International Hotspot Conference in North America in 2024. We will keep you informed about updates. I wish you all an informative and pleasant session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marianne, and thank you also for being initiator on this program and circular economy as a whole. I know your consulate's also working on the built environment, so great to see all these initiatives. Please allow me to hand over and to move over to Canada. I would like to give the floor to Colleen Isaacs. Colleen, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ruben. It's my pleasure to be with everybody today, and good morning and good afternoon to all. I'm going to focus very much on how recycling has evolved over the last 40 years or so in Canada, so that everybody has at least a basic understanding of how we got to where we are today. Then Joe Hruska will be picking it up from there and talking about what's happening now and what we expect to happen in the future. I'm going to move to the next slide, and probably the next as well, by providing those who are not familiar with Canada a quick overview, because our system of governance is quite different from that in most European countries and is very relevant to the evolution of recycling, both of plastics and other materials. I'm also going to be talking mostly about post-consumer recycling, that is household recycling, because that's been the most active area over the last few decades. But it's not to say that we don't have a good institutional, industrial, and corporate recycling programs underway. They're just managed almost entirely by the private sector rather than a partnership of the private sector, municipalities, and governments. Canada consists of 10 provinces and 3 territories for a total of 13 jurisdictions. The 3 territories are subunits of the federal government, and there's very little recycling going on in the 3 territories. They are the far northern parts of Canada. The 10 provinces are, if you like, almost self-governing agencies when it comes to recycling and waste management activities. And therefore we have 10 provinces and 10 different recycling programs and legislative frameworks across the country. Canada has a very long border with the United States, which is a big influence on our governmental programs, a huge coastline. We're the second largest country in the world after Russia, but our population of a little lower than 40 million people is quite low for the size of country we are. And 90% of the population is concentrated within 160 kilometers of the US border. So you can see that one of the challenges we have in recycling is movement of goods and movement of recyclable materials and recycled material from one province to another along this long border. Next slide, please. Today's recycling programs began to evolve in the late 1960s, when environmental groups started rallying public support for recycling programs at the household level. The driving force in those days was that landfills were getting full quite rapidly, and the public didn't want to see landfills located anywhere near where they lived. So reducing the amount of waste material going to landfill became an urgent necessity in order to maintain a balance between public population and the amount of landfill space that we required. Not a lot happened for a few years, but by the mid-1980s, a major waste management company that was running the waste management program in Kitchener, Ontario, a city about 150 kilometers west of Toronto, decided to run a pilot program in what they call blue box recycling. We'll be talking a bit more about blue box as this webinar unfolds. The program was a great success with the public in Kitchener and very quickly became a permanent program, not just in Kitchener, but in other cities in the neighborhood. The public opinion demanding that the city council make blue box recycling permanent was quite intense. The Ontario government, however, was not nearly so enamored with recycling. I remember going to the Ontario Environment Ministry and telling them how successful blue box recycling had been in Kitchener and suggesting that they should roll it out across the entire province. Their response was that people who lived in Kitchener were of European background and therefore inclined to recycle, but the rest of Canada really wasn't very interested in recycling, and they weren't too interested in, the government was not too interested in sponsoring blue box programs across the province. Of course, the environmentalists, of which I was one at the time, rejected that explanation and continued to push for blue box. And by the late 1980s, early 1990s, we had curbside recycling programs expanding in most Canadian cities. There were and still are some deposit refund systems, mostly for beverage containers, but by far the most effective recycling programs we have for household materials in Canada are curbside programs run essentially by the municipality or by the private sector under contract to the municipality. Next slide. This is a photograph that shows you typical blue box and shows you the popularity of blue box recycling on garbage collection days or recycling collection days. You can see that just about every house on the street has its blue box out, many of them full to overflowing, and very, very high participation rates, often greater than 60% of households, and in some municipalities as high as 80 to 90%. Next slide. Talking about circular economy for plastics, I think it's necessary to look at how much circular economy is being adopted by governments at all levels. The federal government of Canada is explicitly moving slowly towards adoption of a circular economy, but we have no legislation, nothing similar to the EU framework. And at the moment, the federal government doesn't spend much time focusing on circular economy, though they keep promising activists that they're going to start paying attention sometime soon. 3 out of 10 provinces have already adopted strategies which explicitly include circular economy. One province, Ontario, the largest province, already has a Circular Economy Act, but it's really focusing on recycling of post-consumer materials, including plastic and other packaging materials. Circular economy is on its way to becoming entrenched in Canadian and business and government thinking, but it's nowhere nearly as entrenched as the situation in Europe today. And Canadian business and government still, in my opinion, have a lot of learning to do. Next slide. Who governs recycling in Canada? Well, the federal government has almost no role in waste management and therefore almost no role in household recycling, but it can play a persuasive role with provinces and municipalities. And in the last couple of years, it's decided to do that and has developed a program for post-consumer recycling of plastics, which involves trying to encourage municipalities and the provinces to work together to develop a national program with uniform rules and uniform procedures. Most provinces now have legislation which provides a framework for household recycling, but the recycling laws in each province are slightly different. I don't have time today to go into them, but as you can imagine, it drives business crazy to have to conform to different rules in each of the 10 provinces. The day-to-day rules governing household recycling and what consumers should do are the responsibility of municipalities. There's over 2,000 municipalities in Canada. There's no uniformity at all, and therefore everybody gets pretty confused as to what to put in their blue bin because it varies from municipality to municipality. Some municipalities run recycling collection and processing facilities themselves. Others contract the services to the private sector. The environmental performance of collection and processing facilities, known as municipal recycling facilities or multi-material recycling facilities, is regulated by the province under environmental laws in which the facility is located. Initially, in most provinces, funding for recycling came from the province, the municipality, and industry in varying shares. But now things are moving towards extended producer responsibility, with the private sector, the producers or companies that put the packaging materials on the market, having to pay the entire freight and meeting the full costs of the recycling program. Next slide. What are the weaknesses in Canadian household recycling programs? Well, there are quite a few, but the major ones, as I perceive them, is that collection of recyclable materials, particularly packaging materials, has plateaued at about 40% of recycled materials. Only 10% of end-of-life plastics are currently being collected and recycled, and it's proven quite difficult to put in place incentives to try and get that 10% up to much higher percentage. Canada has a shortage of plastics recycling facilities at the present time, facilities that are required to process and make use of the available plastic materials. That's beginning to change, and more companies are coming on board to turn collected end-of-life plastics into pellets that can be put into new plastic products and packaging, but still very few compared to the need and compared to the amount of plastics in the marketplace. There are very few industrial scale upcycling, closed loop recycling, or quality downcycling facilities for most resin types. So a lot of work is needed to bring the right kind of recycling facilities, the right kind of circular facilities into the Canadian operational system. Next slide. Reasons for the recycling weakness. I think it's important not to blame, but to try and understand. And one of the biggest problems, as I've already mentioned, is that Canada's population is thinly spread out over very large distances. Transportation of end-of-life plastic materials is expensive compared to the value that they bring. And we need to find some innovative ways to deal with that if we're to make plastic from recycled material competitive with plastic from virgin material. Recycled materials are often governed by laws that govern waste materials, and they're often considered as waste materials. That tends to put the wrong spin on what recycling of plastic is all about. I believe, and many of my colleagues believe, that we shouldn't use the term for end-of-life plastics as waste. We should instead see them as resources that can be recovered and reused in new products. The cost of recycling is usually considered as an addition to waste management budgets. In other words, the municipality pays for landfill and it carries on paying for landfill whether or not it recycles. And unfortunately, that means that when they start cutting budgets, they tend to start cutting recycling budgets rather than landfilling budgets. Same applies to compostable plastics. That's seen as yet another add-on cost, rather than as the basic cost of running a collection and management system for end-of-life materials. The avoided landfill costs are often ignored. Contamination of recycling streams is a significant problem for plastics, typically 4% or more, and is made worse by inadequate public education. A lot of people puzzle over what packaging materials should go in the blue box, what should go in the green bin, which is for organics, and what should go in the garbage, which is either a black bin or a green plastic bag. Labeling of recyclable materials in the marketplace is confusing to the public. A lot of materials are labeled as recyclable that are not collected by municipalities. A lot of things that are collected by municipalities are not labeled as recyclable. So I'm convinced that we can solve some of these problems by improving communication and public education. And finally, on my short list, investment in companies that recycle end-of-life materials and make use of the post-consumer recycled material is not encouraged sufficiently by government regulations. And there's a lack of demand for post-consumer recycled material. Again, as I've indicated, Canada is a big producer of oil and gas, and there's a tendency for virgin material produced from fresh oil and natural gas to be cheaper than the post-consumer recycled material collected from consumer programs. So we need to find ways to balance that in order to make the post-consumer recycled material environmentally and economically preferable. Extended producer responsibility is now beginning to be rolled out across the country. It's been in various levels and in various models in place in 3 or 4 provinces for a few years now. But the federal government is now trying to encourage all provinces to introduce extended producer responsibility and to do it on a uniform program basis across the country. Governments hope that EPR will resolve some of the issues that I've listed and others that are inhibiting post-consumer recycling. I must admit I'm not quite so optimistic as governments, but I'm prepared to give it a try. So that ends my brief remarks, and I know Joe will be picking up where I've left off and taking you down the road of what's happening with plastics in Canada in his 2 presentations later in this webinar. Thank you very much, Ruben.
Thank you, Colin, and thanks for this comprehensive overview. Curious also to discuss later on in Q&A with you with what you think about the compostable plastics. You mentioned it briefly. It's always, let's say, a point of discussion. But let's get back to that in the Q&A session. For now, I'll be handing over to our next speaker, who's on the Dutch side, Arnoud Pasnier, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. Arnoud, over to you.
Thank you, Ruben. It's my pleasure to talk with you internationally on the circular economy and especially on plastics, where I have has a long history with plastics packs in the Netherlands and Europe maybe to inspire you a bit on what we do as a Dutch government on plastics and the circular economy. Next slide, please. First of all, to underline, and often there is a lot of discussion about plastics. We should get rid of plastics, etc. In the end, if you are looking at the LCAs of plastics and other materials, often plastics is the most sustainable material, but we use it really badly. We should be careful in the use of plastics, the overuse of plastics, but also about how to reuse it and keep it in the loop. Next slide. Our plastics policy in the Netherlands is based on the what we call the ladder of circularity, the 10 circular strategies, which starts with, if you don't need it, don't produce products and packaging at all. So that's the starting point, and with that you can reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, on all things we get from the earth. In the end, it's about less use of raw materials, and you can do with reducing the materials in packaging, in products. You can share it. So the sharing economy is one. And of course, if you talk about packaging, you can reuse and refill, introduce reuse and refill systems. So narrowing the loop, not only closing the loop, but narrowing the loop is also part of the circular economy. And I think with that, there's a lot to prevent. And if you talk about the waste management infrastructure, you can start with narrowing the loop without having that infrastructure. So that's a starting point where Canada and other countries can start with reducing the need of waste management. For packaging, it's less relevant, slowing the loop. It's longer and more intensive use. But for other products and other sectors like the building sector and the manufacturing sector, it's really impactful if you can repair, refurbish, repurpose, etc., to have products longer and more intensive in use. Often that is forgotten also in policies, and we are now trying as a European Union. We are now have a right to repair initiative, but at the same time also other initiatives to set up regulations on the longer use and longer lifetime of products in the European Sustainable Product Regulation. Of course, closing the loop is very important to start with. If you will prevent landfilling and incineration, which is also bad for the environment, for climate. So we are trying to not only recycle, but if you want to close the loop really, then you have to look at the quality of the recycled material. So therefore we introduced not only with a collaborative approach, but now also with regulation in Europe, mandatory schemes of use of recycled content. With that, you can create a demand pool for recycling companies, which help them create a good business case. And with recycling alone, we are not ending our dependency on fossil fuels. So in the end, we should look also for bio-based plastics, but they have to be sustainably produced. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have here a picture of all those. It's only in Dutch, but you can understand all the 10 strategies, circularity strategies. But it's easy to understand, and it's not only about narrowing the loop, slowing the loop, closing the loop, but also on substitution. So sometimes we can look in for alternatives there where the plastics are not that sustainable as this in some other circumstances. Next slide. The most so what can you do? Of course, here is in this picture we see that a lot you can do as a government. And it's not only about it is a transition of our economy, our economic system, where you develop innovations in the direction of circularity, as you can see in the X curve. But at the same time, you have to disincentivize companies to keep doing the same in a linear economy. And therefore you have to work with them to transform their business model to a circular one. So that's very important to understand that with only looking at how to promote circularity, you forget that there's a lot of you can create a lot of resistance with the existing companies working in the linear economy. But of course, you need to regulate. It's not enough if you have an EPR system in place. Of course, EPR also for packaging gives a real good incentive if it's if the tariffs you use are high enough. So companies understand that which product they bring to the market is affecting the waste management and also the cost of waste management, and they have to feel it. So that's one element. But at the same time, you see that, the previous speaker talked about the landfilling. It's too cheap. Well, incineration can be also too cheap. Export of waste can be too cheap. If you raise the bar for that, it's also easier to direct it to the recycling facilities. So it's important to understand the complete market incentives which you can do. And sometimes you have to set the regulations and say, well, we don't want anything left in landfills, which is recyclable. We did it in the 1990s. It helped us to go away from landfilling, but at the same time, nowadays we have a lot of overcapacity in the incineration, where we have to say goodbye to those investments and assets, which is painful for the companies themselves. So it's really good to have the right incentives, but also regulate where necessary. At the same time, it's also very good to not only give incentives to the market to pay attention to the costs of waste management, but also to incentivize them to redesign their products and services. And I've in the Netherlands, we have a Circle program, which is focused on businesses. They have to learn to rethink their business model with their services and products, and that's a really successful one, which you can introduce in Canada and elsewhere as well. And a very important thing is also to show as a government what you tell others. So use your circular procurement in the direction of circularity, and challenge the industry to make their products and services as much as circular as possible. Of course, invest in smart collection and sorting. That's also part of the deal, and so subsidies can help. Educate is not only the public, but also the people working in the waste management sector, in the circular economy sector. They have to do that. And innovate together, because in the end, and I'm going to back to my previous speaker, also in rural areas, you have to find new innovations, also small scale innovations. Well, I have to say, I can say a lot of more, but 2 slides further, I have one last slide. Make it make it practical. So promote redesign like the Circle program as we have developed. Create guidelines for the industry to use less and also monomaterials, which is much more easier to design for recycling. Create also a roadmap together with the industry and academia to drive back single-use packaging, and invest in test facilities for sorting and recycling, like we did in the National Test Center for Circular Plastics. It's a really successful one in which we set up the infrastructure, and nowadays there's a lot of testing by the companies themselves. So that also accelerates the innovations in the Netherlands. Okay, I leave it with that, but a lot to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arnoud, for sharing this, and great to have your expertise on board. Also for the panel later on. I also already see some questions popping up for you in the Q&A box. Same for Colin, by the way. We'll dive into them also during the Q&A, but maybe you can also live respond to some of the questions so that people can already start reading them. So feel free to comment directly on the questions. Moving over to Canada. Thank you, Arnoud. We move over to Joe Ruska. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Ruben, and I'm thrilled to be here on this expert panel and welcome everyone from around the globe in Canada and Europe and elsewhere. I want to thank my colleague and friend who has helped in many ways establish the Blue Box in Canada and sustainable policies, Colleen Isaacs. I agree totally with his synopsis of what's happened here in Canada. So I'm going to build on that, talk about some policy and developments in Canada. So if I can have the next slide. Just people ask who's Pathway Group? Well, we're a government relations group, but our senior management, we are all have been involved in municipal people, corporate, working at different levels of government, and all involved in environmental policies in our careers. So, you know, our main mantra is creating win-wins for our clients and governments to better society. Next slide, please. So here's my overview of what we'll talk about. I'm 10 minutes. I could probably go on for 60 minutes, but I'm going to keep this short and talk to the very high level issues and policies on plastic management in Canada. So I won't go through this list right now. We'll hit it as we go along. Next slide, please. So there was an economic markets and waste study done in Canada as part of the country and the provinces looking at to deal with plastic manufacturing and the resources that are produced at the end. Deloitte Touche and ChemInfo did that study for Environment Canada and became a base for some of the policy developments. Next slide, please. So here's what the Canada's plastic resin products industry in Canada looks like. It is a huge industry, 35 billion, 5% of Canadian sales manufacturing, employs almost 400,000 people. And I would say probably more, the indirect employment is an estimate, a lot of establishments, but the one thing you'll see on end use is it's throughout the whole economy. And it's critical to our modern lifestyle, our health, and sustainability. It's dealing with our approach to climate change, protects the environment and our food supplies. However, we, as previous speakers have said, we need to manage this critical resource throughout its total life cycle and be more effective in its management. Next slide. It's going to be hard to read the graphic, but that came from the Deloitte Touche ChemInfo report for Environment Canada. But it clearly shows we need to shift to a circular economy. 86% of plastics across the whole economy, not just packaging, which people seem to focus on, is a missed opportunity and belongs in circular economy. 9% recycled. Mind you, it's different levels of recycling. In packaging, you'll find PET bottles under deposit or curbside recovery, like water bottles, have a 75% recycling rate across Canada. It varies. Plastics across all sectors have varying recycling rates depending upon their infrastructure. And even EPR that Colleen Isaacs mentioned affect what's happening in the infrastructure. 4% energy recovery. We only have really 0.6% leaked into the environment through unmanaged landfills, which create the most, and other leaks such as litter. Next slide, please. So here's the overview that I'm going to talk about, because we mentioned that Canada is also resorting to bans, and I think that has a huge impact on the circular economy. Just so you know, much of it came out of the G7 Oceans Charter, developed June 2018. About 30 governments and 70 plus corporations have signed on to this, and I think it's growing much more than that. On June 19th, Canada announced the single-use plastic bans by 2021. But this was even before the science assessment started and studies were released. Just so you know, part of it's to address the ocean plastic problem. Canada, by the way, we manage our plastics already quite well in our system. It's 187, 192 countries in terms of performance. We know China and much of the other developed countries are #1 in contributing to ocean plastics. So Canada is not a big polluter of oceans. We manage our plastics, but we have to manage it better within a circular economy. Industry and manufacturers fully agree that plastics have to be managed, but we wanted collaboration with governments, and I don't think that was fully appreciated by the impact of the bans. So we're hoping to collaborate further and continue with the support of plastics in our economy and its benefits. Next slide. This is just a quick synopsis. May 2021, Canada designated plastic manufactured items as toxic in the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. It did ignore provincial jurisdiction over waste and resources. Their own science report does not support the designation, and it's also been challenged provincially and by industry in March 2023. We'll see what the results of that will be. In June 2022, it declared these 6 items to be banned in the regulations, and they indicated that there's more bans to come. I hope that does not happen. I believe in collaboration to manage the situation. Next slide. This just a quick synopsis of the rollout or the coming into force dates. You cannot manufacture or import right now here in Canada these items. Sale of these items ends in December 20th, 2023. And interestingly, they have also banned export of these items. So that gives you an idea how quickly they're moving on these things. Next slide. Other policy developments, which I think are good for plastics, and I think industry would agree, is strengthening the recycling and composting and labeling developments. Recycled content regulations are anticipated in 2023. BNQ, the Bureau de Normalization Quebec, work with industry and stakeholders to develop content regulations. So all this is good for plastic circularity. Next slide. And some people don't like this line, but bottom line is you cannot ban your way to a circular economy. It has, bans have unintended negative consequences. And some of these are uncertainty for investment in infrastructure that Colin talked about, innovation, investments, circular economy for plastics is inhibited. There'll be less circularity. More waste is created, carbon, environment, economic, social impacts, and less conservation of resources. And circular economy needs to recognize the impacts of their decisions and choices. So stakeholders have to look at this within the circular economy. Next slide. Results of bans. Well, you know, plastics have great benefits in society, and if you might not be able to read the bottom line there. This is done by True Cost, who has also advised United Nations Environmental Program. Using alternative materials for the banned plastics have approximately 4 times more impact than using plastics. So we have to be careful on our material choices, and I don't believe anybody would disagree with that. Next slide. So innovation, technology, and design for C&E. What I find disheartening, the government banned innovations such as a plastic reusable bag designed to be reused 125 times. It is very circular, highly environmental. The current reusable bags, fiber, which are woven design, are not circular and then are ending up in landfill. Manufacturer also developed new certified compostable straw technology from renewable resources. It cannot be used and has been banned. But on the horizon, we have new chemical recycling technologies that depolymerize. There's pyrolysis, 21st century advanced technologies that will return plastic molecules back into the economy. All these advancements support zero waste goals and building circular economy with jobs and further investment. Next slide. I just put together this slide using news items, etc., going to the websites. The plastic circular economy is developing. It's plastics is a relatively new 21st century material versus its alternatives. I come from the steel industry and the petroleum industry and finance, but plastics is a new kid on the block, and it's accelerating its development of mechanical and advanced recycling technologies. And over $8 billion has been invested and more since 2017. So you can see all these companies. If I've missed you, when you're one of the companies that you don't see there are hundreds of companies now looking at advanced technologies. Next slide. I just wanted to bring up circular economy versus sustainable material management. I think both models will create an advanced circular recycling or a circular economy model. C&E models or circular economy emphasize on the package or material that offers the most reuse or recovery. And sustainable material management looks at the cumulative impact across the whole life cycle. I think we need to look at both. And if you're thinking about, you want to read more on this, Ameripan talks about this in their circular economy and sustainable material management models for packaging systems. I'm at the end of my time, but I just want to finish off on the future. Next slide, making circular economy for plastics more effective. We need to maintain the benefits of plastics. I won't go through the list there. You can see them all. Many of you know them. But again, it deals with the cumulative effects of our impact on the environment and the economy. One thing that's overlooked is reduction benefits of plastics. It does not seem to be acknowledged. It reduces the use of resources and energy, and it seems to be a victim in all this whole discussion. So innovations in technology require financing and time to support circular economy and societal goals. And I invite everyone to do further research on circular economy, sustainable management to make our circular economy more high-powered and advanced. So thank you again, and look forward to the discussion and debate area. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for, let's say, this first part of your contribution. We'll get back to you later on for some best practices on what happens in Canada. Thank you for this first part, Joe. And you talked briefly about chemical recycling, and one of the Dutch organizations and knowledge institute that's expert in that is TNO. So I'm glad to move over to Esther of TNO. Esther, over to you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. So I will talk about new technologies and mainly focus on the improved plastics recycling. So the next slide, please. So for those who do not know TNO, we are Dutch independent research organizations. We consist of several units, and I'm part of the unit Material and Energy Transitions. And actually TNO, they are working about 3,500 people, so it's quite big. And our mission is to connect people and knowledge, and that is to create innovations that really boost the competitive strengths of the industry and also the well-being of the society in a sustainable way. And we use this mission also for the transition to circular plastics. And then the next slide, please. And in circular plastics, our goal is to connect the value chain, and that starts from the material production, going to the products, and then so on, collection and recycling. And what is TNO doing in this field? We are working on 5 different topics on the system integration. So that is modeling the scenarios, how to look, what are the future scenarios, what should we do to reach these future scenarios? And of course, in the Netherlands and in the EU, we have the goal of 50% circular in 2030 and 100% in 2050. And we're looking there at a life cycle assessment, so at the environmental impact, but we are also looking at the cost and the logistics and how should we arrange the whole system. And that we're doing with all types of stakeholders of this value chain. Furthermore, we are working on technology, so that is the design for and from recycling. We're working on pre-treatment methodologies so that the recycling can be done in a proper way. We work on several recycling technologies such as dissolution and thermochemical recycling. And also one of the societal issues are the microplastics that we see that is a real issue that we have to solve as well when we are going to sustainable plastics of the future. So the next slide, please. So here is an overview of our plastics recycling scenario model, and in this model we can see for this is a scenario model for the stakeholders to sketch the future plastic waste, and here you can see for the plastic waste coming from different sectors, what for the different types of polymers. What is the environmental impact? What is the best technology that can be used to recycle those plastics? And what is then the CO2 emissions? And on the other hand, what are the costs? And this is only a small screen picture. But this gives you also insight for governmental part of view is what kind of choices do we have to make and what kind of investment do we have to stimulate? And do we have to stimulate, for instance, for a certain sector in mechanical recycling or in thermochemical recycling? And based on CO2 impact and cost, you can make the optimal choices. So the next slide, please. And here you see a decontamination technology that can be used as a pre-treatment. And this is based on heating the plastics in water, then a really fast cooling, then the plastic cracks, and you you end up with granulates. And in this one is also a purification step included. And most recyclers, they do not like chlorine in the recycling units. So this technology strongly reduces the amount of chlorine expressed as Cl for the next step in the recycling. And another one which is strongly reduced is the sulfur. Next slide, please. And then I would like to give you an overview of what is going on in recycling. So there are several chemical recycling technologies, and one of them is dissolution, in which you use the solvent to dissolve the plastics a little bit or to dissolve the additives, and then end up with clean recycled plastics. And this technology is, for instance, used for polystyrene. And there is a demo plant, polystyrene loop in Terneuzen, which is for the recycling of expanded polystyrene. Also in Canada, there is a demo plant. This is Polystyrene, who are also working on the dissolution technology. And also, I would like to point out the TNO technology, which is set up in the project Blast to be Cleaned, which is the dissolution of ABS coming from replastics, so that is waste electronic and electrical equipment, and in which we recycle the ABS, the bromine, and the antimonic trioxide. And this technology has the advantage working on superheated conditions, and which gives a really good separation of those additives, and which is also quite energy friendly. For PP and PE, the polyolefins, there are also quite some technologies in development. So one of them is Obotech. They are working on PE and PP materials, and also to recycle them from multi-materials. Also, we use our TNO Möbius technology for PE and PP, and we have quite some good results, and we are now in the phase of scaling that up. And there are also some other technologies. One which is quite well known is the Creasolve technology in Indonesia for the recovery of PE. And then the next slide, please. So then another way of chemical recycling is the chemical depolymerization. So you can do that with polycondensate polymers, so that are typically PET, which is used in bottles, the PA, which is also used in clothes and fishing nets, polycarbonate, PER, and so on. So there I would like to highlight two initiatives. So CURE, which is currently building their demo site in Emmen. And this is quite a nice technology, because here, when you start with the polymer, you go back to cut it in smaller parts, but you're not going completely to this really small parts to the monomers, but you are going to a bit larger, and then you repolymerize it again. And then Ionica, that is the other one, and there you really depolymerize it to the smaller parts, to the building blocks, to the monomers, and then it can be repolymerized to PET again. And these technologies, they can also be, they are not currently be applied, but they have the potential also to be used for the bio-based alternatives like PEF. So another one is polyamide, and there is Fibund working on to recycle used nylon yarn, and they are now in the planning of a demo plant. Next slide, please. And the third technology for chemical recycling is thermochemical recycling, and there you probably heard of pyrolysis. And as this sheet already showed, there are quite a lot of initiatives on pyrolysis and the pyrolysis has the advantage that it can recycle waste from polyolefins, which is more polluted than, for instance, you can do with mechanical recycling. And also you can go back to food grades. And I would like to highlight, and that's on the next slide, two initiatives, which is in the Netherlands. So that is on the next slide. So there is BioBTX and Synova, and they work at a bit higher temperature than pyrolysis, so we call it also thermal cracking. And the advantage of those technologies is that they can use complex waste mixtures from plastics, biomass, and for the BioBTX, they are going from base to BTX, so that is benzene, toluene, and xylene. And Synova is going in a single step to valuable materials. So where you have for pyrolysis, you need an additional step for the cracker. For Synova and BioBTX, this cracker step is not needed. So for Synova, you are going immediately back at these building blocks of olefins. Next slide, please. Furthermore, I would like to highlight also the Circular Plastics NL program. So this is a growth fund program and initiated also by the Dutch ministry, which is also quite nice. This is a large program, 450 million euros, 220 million euros is granted by the National Growth Fund contribution by the ministry. And this one is quite unique in Europe. And in this one, All types of stakeholders are working together to close the value chain of circular plastics. So, and there, from a system perspective, we are working on the design for circularity, on the characterization, sorting, and washing, and on the recycling. And we're doing that by really showcase for the value chains on food packaging, so on the polyolefins, on textile, on the carpets, for the PET, and electronics and care ties. And this is also to meet the goals of the Netherlands in circularity. So on the next slide, I would like to thank you for your attention. And also, if you need further information, then please contact us. Thank you.
Esther, thank you so much on sharing this insights, and great to see that at least we have the technologies, but apart from the technologies, you're also working, of course, on the system change, because that's an important part of that. So please stick with us for also the Q&A later on and the open discussion. Thank you so much, and we go from, let's say, the chemical recycling to the mechanical recycling. Would like to introduce Harmen Otten of Van Werven. Harmen, over to you.
Hello everyone, my name is Harmen Otten. I'm working for Van Werven Plastic Recycling. First of all, I feel honored to give this presentation during this great event. Thanks for that opportunity. I would like to tell you something about our company, about the plastics that we recycle, but also the business model behind it. So how does the business model work? How did the Dutch policies positively impact that business model? And which next steps we can take to further accelerate in a transition to a circular economy. Next slide, please. Van Werven is a family company that already exists more than 75 years. And we are a large service provider in the field of, for example, waste collection, waste recycling, but also we started the plastic recycling activities from 2006. Next slide, please. And these activities are focused on the recycling of bulky, rigid plastics, like garden furniture, crates, PVC pipes, and so on. These plastics mainly arise from municipal recycling centers, as well as from building and demolition waste. And as you can see on this picture, the material is still a mixture of different types of plastics. So we first have to separate all these different polymers. Next slide, please. But next to polymers, we also have to sort different subtypes. Every product has different chemical properties. Some products are filled with, for example, additives. So taking that into account, we first have to sort these materials in around 20 different types. And that's all performed manually, so by hand, because of the complexity just mentioned. Next slide, please. Now, after sorting, we shred, wash, and grind the material. And in the end, we have around 50 different products that we sell as flakes to the European plastic industry. Next, please. And these secondary raw materials are applied in a wide variety of high quality end applications, like in the building and construction industry, as well as in new furniture, automotive, and household products. Next, please. Now, Van Werven has several facilities in Europe. We've started in the Netherlands, and we expanded abroad to Belgium, to the UK, to Ireland, Poland, and Sweden. And we will also start in Denmark. And in total, we have a capacity of around 150,000 tons recyclate a year. But why are we located in these countries? Now, to give an answer on that, we first have to explain the business model of plastic recycling. Next slide, please. And this figure shows the business model. And in fact, there are two important variables. First, the input of plastic waste is influenced by the waste cost, which is the cost of the alternative of recycling. So that's often incineration or landfill. And the higher the waste cost, the more attractive recycling becomes. So that is why we are located in, for example, the UK or Ireland, because in those countries, the waste costs are high. And if you look at the Dutch policy specifically, then the Dutch government also has taken some very good steps to accelerate this business model. First of all, there's a landfill ban for recyclable materials like plastic. Also, incineration taxes have been implemented. And during the past years, these incineration taxes also have become more expensive. And also, next slide, please. The Dutch municipalities are obligated to establish a recycling center in each municipality, in which at least 18 types of waste are collected. And one of them is the bulky rigid plastics. So these measures, the landfill ban, the incineration taxes, but also these recycling centers really accelerated the business model because it helped to generate input material for recycling companies like us. Next, please. So that's the input. On the output side, recyclate should be cheaper compared to new plastics, also called the virgin plastics. As a result, the virgin prices are directly influencing the demand for recyclate. Next, please. So in 2020, due to the first lockdown, due to COVID, the virgin prices collapsed. So that also negatively impacted the market for recyclate. We had to hire extra space to stock our recyclate because we couldn't sell our material. Last year, the virgin prices were sky high, so everyone was willing to use recyclate. So the prices went up, demand went up, but in the meantime, the virgin prices are going down again. So also the prices for recyclate are going down. So that it's a really volatile market, and that also creates a vulnerable situation for recycling companies. Next, please. So that also shows the precarious balance in the transition to a circular economy, in which the old economy is often prevailed at the expense of the new desired circular economy. However, recycling companies cannot anticipate on lower sales of recyclate because they cannot pass on the lower sales revenue to the input waste side. For example, by charging a higher gate fee for the input of plastic waste, because then the cost for recycling becomes higher compared to the cost of incineration. So, and then we cannot attract any input material anymore. Next slide, please. So in fact, we are a bit caught in two systems that have nothing to do with each other, but they are directly influencing the economic feasibility of the circular model. So which next steps can we take in the transition? And that's also what I would like to emphasize. It is a transition, it takes time, it's a journey, and I think the EU and the Dutch government already has taken some very good steps in that transition, as mentioned. So the question now is, okay, what next steps can we take to further give a push on the recycling? Now, first of all, one of the top wishes on the input side is to prohibit the incineration of recyclable waste. At the moment, the choice for incineration or a recycling plant is just a cost consideration, but by implementing incineration ban on recyclable waste, then there's no other choice than recycling. So that will really help to redirect the recyclable waste from the incineration plants to the recycling facilities. And the Dutch government is already considering this ban, as it's also part on the Dutch national program Circular Economy. On the output side, we should disconnect the market for recyclate from the virgin market. And there should be two separate markets, one for virgin and one for recyclate, that are not influencing each other. And there are multiple ways to achieve that. The recycled content obligation is already mentioned, and it really forces companies to use an X% of recyclate in new products. And the EU already has proposed to implement this obligation for packaging products by 2030. So that's a good step. And the next step is also to extend this to all those other non-packaging products, because that market is also big. Secondly, we can make virgin more expensive. And virgin taxes is an example of that. That's already implemented in the UK. So we are convinced that those measures will really help to create a more demand, a continuous demand for recyclate. Next slide, please. And that's important because there are many CO2 advantages when companies are using a recyclate, because every ton of plastic waste brought to a mechanical recycling company saves the same CO2 emissions as one electrical car in a year. So that's huge, and I would like to share that number with you. Next slide, please. So let's further accelerate the recycling of plastics, because it will hopefully help to prevent that we throw away our beautiful globe into a waste pile, like on this picture, because that's not what we all want. Thank you for your attention.
Harmen, thank you so much for sharing these insights, and also good to have the perspective of the company and to see also how the business case does influence the speed of transition. So great to have those insights, and please bear with us for the panel discussion later on. Moving back to Canada, to Joe for some more examples from Canada. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Ruben, and Harmen and Arnaud brought up, I think, some of the best practices in policy and actual process. If we can skip right to the overview, Ruben, I'm going to talk about these 4 areas. I just wanted to say, in terms of best practices, you can probably come up with what I know of probably a couple dozen. What I want to do is highlight the foundations of more critical best practices that I have experienced in the launching of the Blue Box in 1984 and working with all the stakeholders and the components of those best practices, some of which have already been discussed by Arnaud and Harmen. So next slide, please. So what is the circular economy defined? And, you know, there are many definitions and understanding or misunderstandings about it, but what is the main goal? Nothing is wasted and all waste resources are kept in the economy. Zero waste, zero pollution if that's possible, and reduce our dependence on virgin materials. So I took 2 circularity definitions, one from the Government of Canada and which is on this slide, and really finding better innovative ways to better the environment and the economy and using resources wisely. And it's not just from waste, but along I believe, the whole value chain. Next slide is Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Many of you are familiar with this. It's based on 3 principles: eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value, and regenerate nature, a regenerative nature approach. Again, you put all these together, I think it's good for the circular economy for plastics. And I brought up the sustainable materials management approach that Ameripen's brought forward. Either way, we need some best practices to implement these things. So next slide, please. Next slide.
One moment, please. Sorry for this technical issue. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Please, maybe you can.
How about I speak to it while you're
sorting maybe you can speak to it, Joe, in the meantime. Well,
yes.
Yeah, so there we go. There we go. I think you're already
here. It is. It came up. Plastic circularity by the numbers in Canada. Let's just talk about the base here. Only 9% of the plastics were repurposed in our economy. That means 91% were manufactured from virgin resources and resource extraction. So we have to close the circularity gap, and the Deloitte Touche report reported about 7.8 billion plus in lost opportunity. I looked at some global numbers at the circularity gap, probably around 8.6%, which means 90% plus virgin materials are being used. So we've got a long way to go to get to circularity. And I think some best practices and the foundations for those best practices would help immensely, that we have used here in Canada since the start of the Blue Box. Next slide. I want to make it clear, best practices, one size does not fit all. There's common principles and best practices. However, sectors will prioritize their main needs and requirements. And I put down the main sectors out of the Deloitte Touche report that have different needs and different priorities. But either way, I can tell you a lot of those sectors are working on minimizing waste, conserving resources, and they're all working on it. And no one sector is using a certain formula. It's what works for them. So I think you have to keep that in mind. So I'm not advocating or prescribing, but I think these foundations I'll present do work in all those sectors. Next slide. So one of the things I've learned in my corporate world and launching the Blue Box and bettering the Blue Box with various stakeholders is continuous improvement and making small incremental changes on products, processes, and systems should be the goal of all organizations. And I've heard that today. You can identify the need for new innovations that further improves the performance and bottom line of the circular economy. The resulting benefits will be reduced costs, improved product services, really doing more with less resources that support circular economy goals. I think it's easier said than done, but I know there's a commitment by all sectors to reach those circular economy goals. Next slide. Next foundation is right off the bat, and Arnaud mentioned this, designed to minimize waste throughout the entire supply chain. So designed for durability, and plastics is one of the most durable materials around. So that's why it's so important to keep it in the economy, not to ban it, make use of all its durability to extend the life of the product as many possible ways, then recycle it or recover it. Designed for recycling. Well, I don't have to really explain that. Everyone in the circular economy approach believe in that. Use other options such as reuse. It'll intensify the use of the product, conserves resources and energy, and actually reuse also supports reduction. And again, reduction is the crown jewel of any waste management system or waste resource system or resource system. If you don't use it, that's the best thing you can do. Design out material intensity. Less material means less impacts. Consider the full life cycle impact in the design of the products and services. I'm just going to say, use the old term, cannot rob Peter to pay Paul. And some of the processes that are misconstrued with circular economy is, I'm going to recycle everything. Well, I think you need more than recycling to make things work, and it's all 4 R's. And that is reduce, reuse, recycle, recover, and compost. And that means using a sustainable waste management system, even at the end, that is an integrated system. And many European countries have integrated resource or waste management systems. Great book written by Procter & Gamble, 2 actually versions on integrated waste management. I would encourage everyone to read, because it really focuses on reducing impacts on the full system, environmentally, economically, and socially. So we also have to design with clear targets and goals. And once you determine those goals, you can put a system in. Are we going to reduce total environmental impacts? Is it economic, or is it social? Or it's a combination of both with different priorities. Next slide. So this one, and these best practices aren't in particular order, but I can tell you, in launching the Blue Box in '84, markets was an issue. Collaboration was critical, and it's critical in building an efficient circular economy system, because it's a challenge for one organization to implement and execute. So we have to collaborate with partners, build a system that creates win-win opportunities throughout the whole supply chain. And I can tell you, I chaired the industry group that dealt with creating markets and design change. And we had brand owners, we had municipal people involved, the recyclers who actually had to recycle the material, created markets for paper and box board, plastic tubs and containers, even designed out PVC cap liners in beverage bottles to improve the value of PET bottles that were captured through deposit return and curbside collection systems. So collaboration can help organizations also access expertise not accessible to overcome barriers in creating a circular economy system, and also access new technologies and innovations. Next slide.
Joe, maybe can I ask you to let's move over to the open discussion. If you can wrap up in maybe 1 minute, so we have some time for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got 2 slides here. So scaling up is important. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but it allows you access to capital and advanced systems and consistent volumes of collected feedstocks and markets for manufacturers. Next slide. Governments do impact circular economy in a big way. So we need policies to incentivize R&D, new innovations, recycled content, tax credits, accelerated depreciation policies, but greater collaboration between plastic industry and all the other stakeholders will be a win-win for all of us. So that's all I have to say, and I thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Ruben.
Yeah, thank you so much. And sorry to rush you into that, Joe, but we're also curious to hear a bit of your opinion on some of the questions that we had from the audience. First of all, there are some questions on if we can share the presentations. The overall recording of this whole webinar will be shared with all the participants in the next few days. So please keep an eye on your email and your inbox so you'll receive the recording or the link to the recording. I would like to move over to the first question, and maybe that's for Esther. I think you already mentioned that you would be able to reply it because it's actually for all panelists. It's about the question is if chemical recycling is extremely energy intensive, and how is this taken into consideration when we look at CO2 emission overall? Are decisions being made on this, and they are also incredibly expensive, are they? Esther, is this a question you can address?
Yes, I can give my view on it. Well, what we did, and we have also a paper, and I was actually trying to make a reference in this paper, but clicked the wrong button. So in this paper, and I will provide you a reference with this afterwards, we looked at the different types of polymers and the different types of recycling technologies. And what you see that is for some of them, mechanical recycling is better, and for some waste streams, thermochemical recycling is better. And that depends on the waste streams. Do you have a very clean waste stream, then mechanical recycling is very good. But have you more contamination, then you need to go to other technologies. So depending on your waste stream, you have you will choose what is the most optimum technology. And regarding the costs, that is still an issue when you compare that to virgin material. And then what we see is that recycling is not always competitive. And that means that we should make it new business models. And also I think that policies can have an influence, that we also include the environmental impact in the price. And now the environmental impact, we are not paying for it, and we are putting it forward to the next generations. I think now it is time that we take responsibility for what we are now polluting on the earth, and that we are also paying for it. And And when you're doing that, taking into account the environmental impact, then you see that those new technologies are competitive with the new ones. And the last thing what I would like to mention is that we do not have only to look at the quantities of recycling, so that is important, but also at quality, so that we have sufficient high quality recyclate.
Thanks, Esther. And maybe if you can share your link in the chat, we can also share it with the audience.
Yeah, I will do that.
Yeah, Arnold, I think you want to respond to that as well. And maybe yeah, please go ahead, respond first. Yeah. You're still mute, Arnold.
Sorry. Yes, the quality of the material is very important. And what you see now in the Dutch perspective, where there's an eco-modulation in our EPR system. So that means that there is a tariff differentiation between sustainable products or packaging which come to the market and less sustainable packaging. There you see that companies like Unilever, Nestle, etc., they are now working together with recyclers to have high-grade recycled materials, which they can put in new products or new packaging. And they are really ready to pay a higher price for high-quality materials. And if you see that in the end, also the European regulation is moving towards mandatory schemes of application of recycled content in new products and packaging, then you see that there's beginning to develop a new market of high quality recycled content and high quality recycling. So also for chemical recycling, because in some circumstances, chemical recycling can have the highest quality, which also is able to be used in food contact materials. So that's why the industry is also really eager to find ways to scale up that kind of chemical recycling technologies.
Thanks a lot for that, Arnold. Yeah, Joe, over to you.
I just want to add, we have to build the infrastructure, and the challenge is feedstock supplies for chemical recycling or mechanical to supply to these manufacturers. And the explosion in EPR, not just in Canada, but some places in the US and also Europe, will help that. And we cannot make things circular without all those infrastructures needed to supply the supply chain.
Thanks. And Harman, I'm sure that you know, you've been talking about the business case. So overall, maybe you can briefly react to it, but maybe you also, having seen the presentation from Joe and Colin, have a question for them on what's happening and how the business case could work in Canada. Over to you, Harman.
I think I would like to add on the discussion related to the chemical recycling. I think mechanical and chemical recycling goes hand in hand. It's not or chemical or mechanical recycling, but it's mechanical and chemical recycling. And so for those waste types that can already be recycled in a mechanical way, those can be recycled mechanically. But for those plastic types that cannot be recycled in a mechanical way, then chemical recycling can be a very good solution. So they go hand by hand.
Colin, maybe you have from your expertise something to add to the discussion.
Yes, I just want to comment on the suggestions for various taxes that that will lead to incentivizing of recycling. Pretty well all Canadian governments are absolutely committed to never again raising taxes, and environmental taxes are a particular target. There's essentially no opportunity to have a government municipally, provincially introduce landfill taxes or waste taxes of any kind, or taxes on non-recyclable plastics. Not going to happen. And just to illustrate that, the federal government did try to bring in a carbon tax in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from numerous sources, all associated with fossil fuels. And that has been challenged in court by the provinces and continues to be a very controversial topic. And our major opposition party has committed that if they come to power in the next federal election, which looks like a possibility, they will rescind the carbon tax. I think if you want stable markets, Canada can't go down a tax route, and we have to find other ways of moving forward.
All right, thank you. And unfortunately, we never have enough time for all those webinars and discussions because there's just so much to share. Before I'm going to wrap up, Arnoud, may I ask you if we take the overall webinar, and you've heard the presentations of Colin and Joe, what would be the main takeaway and the next step we can get in this collaboration, apart from going to Canada next year for the Canadian Circular Hotspot event?
Yes, and in the end, it's about creating awareness. Also, is if the government is not eager to incentivize the market and be a market master to organize the whole value chain, and then you have to create awareness. So that's first. Secondly, I think a lot of companies are working worldwide, so they also are used to adapt their policies to the European and others. Circular economy is everywhere, so create that platform and strengthen the platform with the right stakeholders to engage in not only developing policies for the government, but also to engage in collective innovation. I think that's the main topic for the circular economy. So get together, share your knowledge and experiences, and move along together to make it to create that circular economy.
Thank you so much. Maybe as a final remark, Colleen or Marianne, is there anything you want to share about the next year's event in Canada?
There will be one stream during the 3-day conference that will be focusing on plastics. So there's certainly an opportunity to get together with a group of stakeholders from Canada and from other countries to discuss this topic further, and maybe to come up with some solutions that will aid the Canadian government to move forward with its objective to remove plastics from the waste stream and from the environment.
Okay, looking forward to continuing this discussion next year, Colleen. Marianne, some final remark from your side? No, there's a technical issue on the sound. Okay, thank you so much. So that brings us already at the end of our session. What we would like to do is, I would like to remind you that Holland Circular Hotspot will organize an accelerated session at the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki in June. Some more information can be found as well on our website, so also keep an eye open for that, and of course on next year's event in Canada. So I would like to all of our speakers, of course, and also to our online audience, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found a fruitful discussion and webinar. I think there's enough topics to continue this discussion and also to enhance the further collaboration between Canada and the Netherlands. So also in Canada, thank you so much, Joe, Colleen, for joining us, also from the Netherlands, of course, and also my colleague Emma for organizing this behind the scenes, and of course Marianne from the consulate. So thank you all. Looking forward to seeing you next time, and wish you a pleasant day and a great evening for those in the Netherlands. Thank you so much. Bye bye.